Hello, friends. My name is Iris Josephina. I'm your host, and you are listening to the Planting Seeds podcast. On the Planting Seeds podcast, we explore how we can cultivate a more gentle relationship with our cyclical bodies, the earth, each other, and the world around us through using our senses, science, the subtle, and the secret. On Planting Seeds, we talk about all those topics you've always wanted to talk about. We are shamelessly opening up the conversations that we all so desperately need to settle in our precious bodies and relate to each other in a more open, truthful, and empowered way. I'm so glad you're here today. Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Planting Seeds podcast. This episode is one that I have been looking forward to for so long. I'm sitting down today with Holly Grigg-Spall and Abby Epstein. Holly Grigg-Spall is the author of the cult book Sweetening the Pill, or How We Got Hooked on Hormonal Birth Control. She's also a producer on the film The Business of Birth Control, a documentary inspired by her book that is currently available to stream. And she also works as a communication strategist and creative director for brands in the female health space. And Abby is one of the creators of the documentary The Business of Birth Control. She made her film directing debut in 2004 with her documentary V-Day Until the Violence Stops. This documentary received both an Emmy and a Gracie Allen Award. In 2007, she teamed up with Ricki Lake for their widely acclaimed documentary, The Business of Being Born, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and was released by New Line Cinema / Netflix and broadcast on Showtime. The film's success led to their follow-up series, More Business of Being Born, featuring people like Cindy Crawford, Alanis Morissette, Gisele Bündchen, and Christy Turlington, plus a book, Your Best Birth, published by Hachette. And after that, they teamed up for another documentary called We the People. And this one was also acquired by Netflix for distribution. And in April 2022, they released The Business of Birth Control, which premiered at DOC NYC and had played at Sheffield Doc Fest and Human Rights Festival in Berlin. Abby Epstein and Ricki Lake produced the documentaries Breast Milk and the Mama Sherpas, and prior to Abby's film work, she directed a Broadway theater, helming national tours and international productions of, for example, the Vagina Monologues. I am super excited to have these two incredible women on today, so let's dive in. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So happy to be here. We love your work.
Oh, thanks. I love your work too. So, Holly, let's start with you. I can't even remember when I bought your book. It's quite a while ago. And I was so impressed by the research that you did and that you exposed in the book and all the information that you provided. What made you write this book in the first place?
I think I was working as a journalist in London at the time, and I was writing film reviews, and I guess I kind of wanted to do some investigative journalism but had no formal education in journalism. I had a BA in American literature to go on. So I kind of was curious about finding a different niche outside of film to write about, and fortunately it landed in my lap in the form of side effects from the pill I was taking at the time. I started doing some digging in those days. This was online forums as opposed to like Facebook groups, because it was some time ago now, and discovered that the pill I was taking was causing the side effects I was experiencing. And from there, I pitched an idea to a magazine that no longer exists, Condé Nast magazine. The editor was really open to the idea of doing a piece on the side effects that you don't know about, the ones that you don't hear about from your doctor. And I launched myself into that and did a lot of research, and it ended up being a 2-page spread, but I didn't use a lot of the interviews and what I found out. So I had a lot of notes to start writing more, and that kind of gave me the encouragement to keep going. And I just started looking into areas and interviewing research scientists that I'd got in contact with through the magazine. And then I began a blog, which is what you did in those days. You didn't do Instagram stories or have a TikTok, you did a blog. And so I wrote a blog for a few years, and I would update it a couple of times a week. And I started getting comments and hearing from women who'd been through the same thing as me. And that blog eventually progressed into a book proposal, and then some years later, to be honest, it progressed into a book. So that's how it came about.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm also curious, how did you get in touch with Abby and Ricki, and how did you create this idea to make this documentary out of the book?
Yeah, so after I got the contract for the book from the publisher, I had gave myself about 6 months to write it because I couldn't take more time off work. I went part-time to do it. So in that 6 months, I was writing the book, and I met a group of people here who were really interested in making a documentary about the pill. And one of those women had seen The Business of Being Born and was super enthusiastic about it. And she said, "Oh, you have to watch this film." And so I did. And I decided to very cleverly, in retrospect, write about it in the book. And so I added it in as a section to my book. And so that gave me the opportunity then, once we had been underway with making the documentary for a while, and struggling. We were all time poor, cash poor, didn't really know what we were doing, all people without much experience. I had the opportunity then to approach Abby and her production company to say, "Oh, I've loved the documentary. I've written about the documentary and the kind of parallels between the two areas of birth industry or pregnancy and the birth control industry and avoiding pregnancy." And so, I had that way to approach, and I sent Abby the book in a few different forms. And then I think sometime later, I can't think of how long it was, I got an email or a call from Abby saying that she was coming to LA and she'd read the book and that she was really interested in talking about the possibility of a documentary that would be a really nice companion piece, essentially like The Business of Being Born, the prequel about birth control. So I met up with Abby and Ricki and kind of, probably ranted and raved for quite some time about the topic, having been glad to find people who were interested in listening to me. And it went from there.
Abby, how did you feel when you read Holly's book, and how did it truly spark you to create this documentary?
So I read the galley of the book on a flight from New York to LA. And I was going to meet Ricki about this other movie that we were actually developing called Weed the People. And so that was kind of the purpose for my trip. And it was funny because, we met with Holly and I read the book and I just immediately, something clicked for me. Similar, I think, in a way to when I was researching for The Business of Being Born, where I was just I was missing this information. I always had a vague awareness about it. And I had very negative experiences with the birth control pill, some of which I knew to attribute to the pill, but some of which I definitely did not know to connect to the pill. And that's, I think, what Holly's book did for me. It reconnected my own history and experiences. And it just truly connected the dots on certain events in my personal life and how those incidents coincided with going on and off birth control. And then, of course, there was the entire, political landscape of the book and, the racist legacy of contraceptives. I mean, everything that, she raised in that book was really, I thought, new ground, fertile ground. And I thought the book was so powerful, of course, because it was really derived from this pretty traumatic experience that she went through personally, coming off the pill and, recognizing what it had done to her mental health. And I just felt like this is, clearly coming from a place of a person who's liberal, who is like pro-choice and pro-access, like immediately could sense what the idea of the book was coming from. And I just, I said to Ricki, I'm like, I just think we may have to talk about this. Like, I know nobody is going to. Like, nobody wants to talk about this. And it is really ahead of its time in many ways, And I think that, if Holly took 100 arrows for her book, we've probably taken 50 arrows for the film. So it's gotten like slightly better. Like, I think it's definitely, more, it's become a little bit more acceptable to criticize and talk about women's health in certain ways. But I just was like, I don't know. I feel like we have to take this on, I just felt like a responsibility, to illuminate this for a broader audience.
Yeah, totally. And I feel that you did such a great job, like offering so many perspectives in one documentary. And just for people who don't know about the documentary yet and have not seen it, could you summarize a little bit what it is about exactly and what the purpose of the documentary is?
Yeah, sure. So, the documentary, it's really a very kind of like broad-based look at how hormonal contraceptives have become like so ubiquitous and just also sort of viewed as like so harmless, as almost like a rite of passage, and not something that's questioned. And certainly the history isn't looked into very deeply. And certainly the neuroscience isn't looked into, and nobody's researching it, because the premise of the film is really that, to sort of say that birth control is not solved and not working for everybody, and placing really a burden on, half the population that has, uteruses. And that, there's a lot of unvoiced real anger and frustration around the lack of options. So the film, I think it covers kind of three threads. It really covers a lot in 90 minutes. But one thing that it, of course, looks at is, side effects of the pill and hormonal birth control. So the full range of side effects from, mental health side effects, depression, anxiety, to more physical side effects, all the way through blood clots, pulmonary embolisms. And we follow a group of families who have all lost their daughters to pulmonary embolisms that were brought on from using the pill or the NuvaRing device. And then we look at the history of the pill in terms of this feminist history in the 1970s, when feminists actually challenged the safety of the pill and were able to get a warning label of sorts put on the package. We trace the racist, I would say, history of the development of hormonal contraceptives from testing the pill in Puerto Rico with a group of women who were completely unaware and uninformed of the side effects, through the current landscapes of, sterilization, up through the reproductive justice movement started by Black women in the 90s, which really came out of a lot of abuse at the hands of medical system and being treated like guinea pigs. And then the last act of the film, we look a bit more toward the future. And so we show kind of the development of the first types of fertility tracking apps. And, could this idea of fertility tracking and, femtech become any kind of a replacement for hormonal contraception, or how is that impacting how women are looking at their cycles or learning about their fertility? So it covers really a ton of ground. And, that's why we ended up launching a 9-part follow-up series, which is accessible on our website, because we just felt like, there are so many experts we interviewed who didn't even end up in the film at all, like not even one soundbite. So we use a lot of their interviews, and we've developed this 9-part called More Business of Birth Control body literacy series. And we look at a lot of things on a much deeper level, because there's certain things we talk about in the film, like, how the pill is overprescribed for, let's say, PCOS and endometriosis and other women's health issues where there really is no research and no root cause kind of investigation going on, and people are just thrown, prescriptions of the pill because that's pretty much the only way that doctors really know how to treat those conditions. That's talked about for maybe 2 minutes in the movie. But, that's something that we dig much deeper on in the follow-up series, because of course a lot of people are told, well, what do I do then? What do I do for my PCOS? What do I do for my endometriosis? So yeah, that's the film, I guess, as best as I can describe it. And, I think that it is, really showing another side of the story. It is not, we recognize, of course, in the beginning of the movie that the pill played a huge role in women's liberation and equality in the workplace, and definitely had its place and time. But that was also like 60 years ago. So, what's next? Because I think, especially now with like younger generations and Gen Z in particular, they are really trying to stay away from endocrine disrupting chemicals and don't really feel like putting this in their body every single day. And they're looking to also, have some more gender equality in terms of who's responsible for contraception, things like that. So I think that it's definitely the kind of movie it's not like a balanced look at like, these are the pros and these are the cons. It's definitely like a real investigation into the downsides and the lack of informed consent. But I also think it's hopeful because we show that there is a lot of energy and innovation, especially from like female-led entrepreneurs, trying to fill this gap and trying to, push this in a different direction.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I completely agree that the movie encourages hope, encourages to feel hope, because I feel that it's a huge conversation starter. Like, we saw each other in London, like afterwards, there's always like a discussion happening, or people are opening up to ask questions. They start questioning like, oh, whoa, like I'm in my 30s and nobody ever told me this. And I took this product since I was 15. Like, why?
Yeah.
And I have the feeling it really creates this feeling and desire of wanting to know. It plants so many seeds for so many more conversations. The people that I work with, they have all these questions like, oh, but how does the body then actually work off of this product? And who am I off of this product? And what does that mean for myself, my relationship? So I see a lot of positive results from this documentary because people really dare to open up and have the conversation, because you paved the way. You showed that this conversation is possible. And not only you, also Holly with your book. I remember when your book came out, I think I shared this book with like every single person who has a menstrual cycle that is close to me when I read your book. And it really opened up conversations. And I think that is what connects people as well, because we suffer in isolation with these kinds of things because there wasn't really a place for these types of conversations. But with various types of media, like a book or a movie, it always invites people to talk. And that's what I love so much about both of you. You both created such a big community and platform for people to start talking, and also give people permission to open up these conversations in their own private spaces, like within their relationship, within their friend groups, within their families. And I feel that is the biggest power of both the book and the movie, because I feel that that is how change happens. Like when we all in our small little worlds, in our small communities, in our intimate relationships with our people, if we all start to have these conversations that are so crucial for just life, life in general, we start to create this change from like bottom up, and we can support each other to also create more change top down. Like in the movie, there were these people who made sure that certain side effects were in the insert. And I think these types of conversations are necessary so that more people become aware. So thank you both like so much for spreading this and for taking on this big job of also being like the face of the revolution. And I can imagine that both of you may have had some pushback as well. Did that happen? And where did it come from?
Yeah.
Like, was it like the medical community or politically or within activism? How did that work for both of you?
Well, I think it's interesting because talking about it in that context, like still my book and the film, potentially the only, like there's a lot of books out now about the side effects of the pill, but most approach it from the point of view of like the individual journey. So you're on the pill or you want to go off the pill and how to relieve side effects or, you know, educate yourself in order to personally just make that decision. But both the book and the film take a more kind of social, cultural context and kind of look at it from the point of view of like, this should be a feminist cause. This should be something that we see through the lens of, you know, why are women taking on the burden of contraception and this kind of reproductive labor of dealing with the side effects throughout their lives and dealing with the coming off and the consequences that can happen there. And so I think that's still kind of rare because I think while the topic is gaining more traction, the topic is still talked about mostly in the realm of like the personal wellness journey, which is much less controversial than talking about it as a cultural issue. Because once you start talking about it as like a cultural issue or what should be a feminist cause or the idea of it being a problem that needs solving by society or collectively rather than just individually, it becomes trickier for some people and people begin to get sort of defensive. So in terms of pushback, when the book came out, it was, you know, I didn't write a very diplomatic book, basically. I didn't approach it in a diplomatic way. I didn't approach it in a way that like was making friends. At the time, I wouldn't, when I began writing this book, probably consider myself a feminist particularly, but I saw it as a fault in like the contemporary feminism that we weren't tackling this subject. And I found that kind of, you know, something interesting enough to write about. So I wasn't really kind to sort of the liberal feminist side, but nor was I very kind to the sort of right-wing religious side. And of course, I was British and talking about mostly what I was experiencing in the US, although it's pretty universal. And so, unsurprisingly, I offended a lot of people who, you know, felt that what they've been doing in championing access to the pill and just really focusing on that, it was, you know, they felt that they'd been doing great work and that they didn't like the idea that they'd been missing something or the idea that the feminist movement should, you know, consider including this area or seeing it in more nuance. And so, you know, when you're coming into the US in the way that it's approached here, you know, that it comes from a place of, well, we need to have access, which is true, but we don't want to talk about side effects and safety because we're giving ammunition to the quote unquote other side who will then use that information that we're openly sharing and talking about in order to roll back access. And so that was really what I talk about in the book as the main tension in this conversation, and that was what was shown in the response, which was really that people felt like it wasn't a good idea to really be talking openly about side effects. They were very questioning of my own story of sharing my side effects that I experienced, and they just felt that this was sort of a dangerous enterprise really to open up this conversation and have women question hormonal contraception. And so it really all came, for me, in terms of the pushback from the liberal feminist side, which shouldn't be completely unexpected, but was difficult to navigate nonetheless. And I still think there is definitely a certain amount of that kind of residue feeling remaining, which wouldn't have been present, I think, if I had taken a more kind of personal wellness or self-helpy kind of route. But I didn't. That's not the background I came from. I kind of came into the wellness world much later on. So it was an interesting ride. And now I think other books are much more, if you were going to look for a book on the pill, you wouldn't necessarily find my book or buy my book. Other books are much more prominent and sell a lot more. So I don't get as much criticism because it's kind of had its time, I think.
Did you expect the criticism that you would receive? Like, did you anticipate that, or did you think about that before publishing?
Well, if you're sensible and you write a book, you don't necessarily think anybody's going to read it. And that's really how everybody should approach writing a book, because most people don't read books and most books don't sell. That's just true. You know, you may sell a few hundred copies, and this is the vast majority of people who publish books on the market don't sell. So I wouldn't say I expected anything really. And the fact that I got reviews in Slate and the New Inquiry, which were horrible takedown reviews, was still kind of awesome, because I read it and people were responding to it and, well, reading it, although that's probably questionable. Some of them were reading it and they were writing about it and they were arguing about it on Twitter. And I mean, I could not be grateful for that, because the alternative for a book like mine, published out of like an independent UK publisher, was that it would sell 10 copies and sink and go out of print. And it was me sat there completely blithely, completely like, perhaps somewhat naively, emailing the PDF to like anyone who would take it, any email address of any journalist I could find. And of course, I pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and they pushed back. And I, you know, yes, some of it was a little depressing, you know, magazines that I'd written for myself that I really loved, that I had subscriptions for. But the fact that there was a response at all was amazing, actually. And then as time went on, you know, the response got more positive and nuanced. And a lot of women who'd gone through a similar experience to me started writing about it, you know, and I got pieces in Vogue and Elle magazine and all over the place that were much more kind of included in a wider piece about the cultural shift off the pill to body literacy. And all of that was much more positive. But the initial reaction of how it was, you know, was mostly negative. And I would be lying if I said that it was an entirely bad thing, because the book is, for a nonfiction book, a bestseller. Mm-hmm. And it has consistently sold, which is very rare. And that has been partly because some people really hated it.
Yeah, wow. How was that for the film, Abby? Did you and Ricki go through like a similar thing? I know the film hasn't been out for so long, but how did it go for the film?
Different. I think different. You know, I mean, it's funny because I remember once, so Ricki and I also wrote a book called Your Best Birth, which came out after our films. And it was really funny because the book went to this mommy blogger, this huge mommy blogger at the time. This was like many years ago. And she was so funny because she picked up the book to do exactly what Holly was saying. Like, she picked up the book with this glee of hate reading, because she was just so sure, you know, that she was going to hate everything that we had to say and couldn't wait to take it down. And then she ended up writing this amazing review about how she had done that. And then this horrible thing happened because she started reading the book and it started to make sense. And like by the end of the book, she had like flipped 360 degrees. It was crazy. And then went to go have like a home birth or a natural birth. I mean, it was like the craziest, funniest thing. And I think that, you know, I just don't know that we have voices like that anymore. I feel like we're in a place where right now, around many things, not only, you know, this topic, people are really, really attached and hungered in to their take. So I think for us, the response of the film was that anybody who saw and reviewed the film like on its own merits for the first, 6 months was incredibly positive. Not that they didn't find like faults with it, but they were open or objective, or they didn't necessarily have like, a dog in the fight, And I think that they could recognize like, wow, this is like a powerful film. This is well put together. This is something that we're not talking about. Why aren't we talking about this? And then I think once the film was released and started to get a little bit of mainstream attention and celebrities started to, have us on their podcasts and get behind the film, then it got a little more dangerous, I think, for the people who are vested in the opposite opinion, and then we saw some takedowns. But, I would say that the couple of those criticisms that came out were very clearly takedowns. And I say that because they were not people who reached out to any of us for comments. That was very, very clearly, writing pieces that were meant to shut this down and finding different ways to get people to not take this film seriously or sort of discount it. So that was our experience. But I think that ultimately the beautiful thing about what we're doing and putting something like this out there in the world is that, we've been hosting these free virtual screenings and we've gotten, between anywhere up to 18,000 people attending.
Wow.
Yeah. And, we did 1, 2, 3 weekends ago, and we had about 10,000 people tune in. So, it's sort of wonderful in a way because the gatekeepers or the certain voices, who have power in the media who don't really want this message out there, they're not helping. Maybe they're not helping us in some ways, but it doesn't hurt us in some ways. And I think what we saw from, let's say, The Business of Being Born is a little bit like what Holly's saying, where we were sort of vilified in the beginning, especially by doctors and medical groups. And then as the times and the culture caught up with us, and like, as you were saying about, as we started to make these shifts from the bottom up, right? And as expectant parents started to watch that documentary and demand changes and demand options, and we saw the culture around childbirth shift, then all of a sudden we were like getting awards at hospitals, and like,
wow.
Yeah, it was like really, really changed. But I'm saying that film has been out in the world for 15 years. So, if you ask me right now, how do you think this film is going to be received in 15 years? I will say, I think we're going to be on the right side of history. And I think there probably will be a point down the road where actual studies are done that are conclusive. And I think this younger generation's putting pressure on the system about wanting change and wanting new options. I think that we will discover down the road that medicating millions of women for most of their reproductive years did have repercussions. And I'm sure, at some point somebody will say, there was a film on this, there was actually a film that talks all about this. That's just my guess, because I think sometimes, it takes like 10 years for culture to shift, and for social movements to catch on. So I totally expect that there will be a turn, 100%. And it's okay for us because it's like, we're not necessarily, as making these films to have like the next, Netflix blockbuster and make millions of dollars. I mean, that's not why you make these films. These films take an incredible amount of work to raise all the funding and awareness and do it in a way that is essentially outside of the entertainment business, and to keep it clean of any kind of influences is very difficult. So it's like they're real kind of, I think, labors of love. And I think just like Holly's book and the film, I think they're gifts in a way, like they're really gifts. And I think you don't focus so much on the people who are threatened and want to take it down. I think you focus on the people who write you emails every day or DM you and say, oh my God, thank you for writing this. Thank you for making this movie. I can't believe this has been happening to me. And now I just put all the pieces together. That's why you do this ultimately.
Yeah. And I started writing about all this in 2009. So it's been a long time. It's been a decent amount of time to see things change. And yeah, on that last point, that is, I get messages and emails and DMs from people saying, basically like, thank you for saving my life, which is some feminist liberal pundit trying to get her Twitter clout telling you that your book's dangerous. It doesn't really matter when you know that you're helping people and you're helping people in a way that changes their life for the better. That is the catalyst for them. Otherwise, you wouldn't keep doing it. Because the point is, I think the amazing thing about working with Abby and Ricki is like we don't have an agenda as such or like a sort of careerist reasoning for why we're doing this. We're very like aware that it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And so why do you do it? You do it to help people. You do it because that's what you want to do with your life. And it's really interesting too, from the perspective of having written about this from 2009, is that I've seen like a whole niche world, and still maybe kind of niche, but growing, of people talking about menstrual cycles, people talking about cycle syncing, people talking about going off birth control. And there are people who've written books and created content that were reactions to my book, which is amazing to see too, right? So you put a book out into the world and it's not perfect. It's just the book that you wrote at the time. And so people can look at that and they can look at how people responded to that book and perhaps what you missed. And so with Abby, I didn't talk in my book at all about the experience of Black women in the US. I just talked about it partly as a memoir, as a white British woman living in Oregon in the US and having moved here. And so I talk about the history a little bit, but I didn't talk about the current situation or the experiences of those people that were very specific to their lives. And Abby was able to pick that up and interview people and talk about that and interview experts and academics and women living it and people who'd gone through, side effects. And that was amazing and absolutely necessary. And then there are other things I missed in my book, or ways that I approached it that other people have got taken up in their work and been able to build on or respond to or react to or say, well, people really needed this, or people really needed to hear it from this perspective, or people really needed this information. And so you just become part of like a longer conversation, and all of it is so important, and all of it reaches areas that I would not be able to reach with my little quirky book published by sort of a radical leftist publisher out in the UK. Thank God. So that's the wonderful thing too, is you don't, maybe in 10 years time you get credit, but you also just get to see things change in ways that would perhaps never be linked back to you. And one of the things though that I do love is that I get pings all the time on my email from academic journals, which are like PhD students and people in universities writing dissertations using my book as part of that. And that's when you start to see like, the culture shift in that way over time. And it's an amazing process, but all of it is underpinned. You wouldn't keep doing it because it's not easy, it's hard, and it doesn't make you popular, and it doesn't win you prizes a lot of the time, and it doesn't make you money. And you just do it because it helps people. And, that's what we want to do with our lives.
It's so inspiring to listen to both of you. And I guess what I'm learning now from both of you is the patience that you both have with the revolution, basically. The patience that you have with how this is progressing, how culture is shifting, how culture is changing. And if I look at myself, when I started to discover all of this, I was really in a space of maybe more anger and go like, oh my God, how can you not see this? How can you not see this happening? And that's obviously not a fertile space to do anything from. I realize that now. But it's very beautiful to both of you hear you basically speak so selflessly about what you have created and have really created it as this gift to land in the world and for people to do with it what they want and receive it and interpret it and use it in their own lives if they need it and open up the conversations. It's really inspiring. Thank you for sharing that and thank you for elaborating. And you spoke a little bit, Abby, about the goal of this is not to make a blockbuster or to, get a lot of money with a documentary. But I remember that I saw this documentary on Netflix. I think it's called She's Beautiful When She's Angry, about the women's liberation movement.
Yep.
When I saw your documentary, I was like, wow, this documentary is a little bit in the same genre, in the same line. Mm-hmm. And I would love for this documentary to be on bigger platforms like Netflix. Mm-hmm. Do you see that happening? Or do you think like we need a couple of decennia for that to happen?
I don't know. This is what I'm talking about, the climate. Like I would say when we premiered the film, because all of our documentaries have been on Netflix. And when we premiered the film, we're using generally the same kind of film sales team. And we absolutely thought this would be like a no-brainer for Netflix. And so I think that we were surprised. And I think that, when you send like the movie like into Netflix like this, they usually, give you some feedback on like why they're not going to put it on right now. And it's just very hard to get anything out of the feedback because nobody really said anything negative about the film. Like all the big streamers, they said, oh my God, this is so important and so well made. But, right now we're looking for uplifting, like it was just coming out of the pandemic. And they were like, we just want like fun things, like more like reality TV style, or they want more personal driven stories, like stories about musicians. And so I think a lot of it really doesn't have anything to do with the film per se, because there are a lot of films on Netflix that are similar, right? I think a lot of it just has to do with the business and the fact that right now, those platforms are competing desperately for subscribers. And so they're really focusing on like celebrities and music and sports and, true crime. And I think if you look at all the documentaries that are coming out on those platforms, for the most part, with few exceptions, they're going to fall into those categories. So I think, we got hurt by just a little bit of just the shift in the business landscape. And I say that because I know it's not just our film. I know many other films by filmmaker friends who came out during and right after the pandemic, and they also have struggled to get placement. But we do have it on Amazon, and we do have it on our website. We have it on Amazon for US, UK, and Germany. And then we have it on our website. It's available to rent all over the world. We have it in a couple of languages. And I know people don't want to rent and, everybody wants it just to be free with their Netflix subscription. But, that's also why we're doing these free screenings. And I think we're going to be picking those up much more in 2023 and having, people host virtual free streamings in their country and, doing other things that we can because, we weren't able to kind of get it up. And, it's possible that Netflix could come back to us in a year or two if the film, has proven really popular. It's possible. But yeah, I agree with you. I wish that we had a bigger platform as well.
Yeah, and the thing is that Amazon is actually, I think, just surpassed Netflix as like the most popular streamer in the US. And the thing is with these streamers is like they might pick you up and put you out there, but whether or not the algorithm will deliver it to the people who need to see it is a whole other game. It's like publishing a book and then not doing any promotion. It's really only part of the process, unfortunately. And if it takes off and you create like a conversation, that's really great, or it might just languish. So like people still need to share that it's there on Amazon to rent, and you still need to build that kind of audience and build out with the free screenings to reach more people. So those that need to hear about this and need this information get to hear it. So yeah, it would be great if it was on Netflix. Like it still needs the support of the community that we have who are so passionate about menstrual health and informed consent to back it. And that would not change in any way. So
no, that really takes time. And I'm hoping, like, I truly believe that when my future children are like coming of age, like this documentary is like a must that they have to watch before they get on any form of birth control so that they are informed. I mean, I will at least show it to my children.
Well, I think that Abby has seen that happen with The Business of Being Born, which is amazing, right? Lots of women do watch that film as part of like their prep for when they're pregnant and deciding what they want to do and what their options are. And it's become such an amazing resource. And I think that, you know, it's fantastic to have a documentary that condenses, like Abby explaining what's in this movie, condenses so much into 90 minutes. I remember when I reached out to Abby initially, like my whole feeling was that, okay, I can write a book and it's only 200 some pages long, but nothing beats a documentary for an almost religious level experience of life change. It just doesn't. Movies move people. So that's why documentaries are just so powerful. And yeah, and if you can get like that much information and that much like personal exploration and insight and thought, and you can go through that with the people speaking on screen in 90 minutes, yeah, it's an amazing resource to have. And it saves people time, and it's like a incredible kind of crash course in everything you need to know.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan, both of the documentary and your book, Holly. I'm a sucker for books still. I love movies, but still a sucker for books. Is there any knowledge of or wisdom or advice that you both want to give people before we close off?
Well, I'll just say that I think that, you know, watching the documentary, yes, there's parts of it that are like very heartbreaking to watch. It's difficult. Parts of it, it really can be enraging. But I think that overall, I've met very few people, even people who are like, you know, in the professional health space, who have watched our film and said that, you know, they didn't learn something new. I mean, even Gloria Steinem, she saw an early rough cut and she said, oh my God, I learned so much. You know, like there's really just, I think, a lot to learn and a lot to know. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about, no matter if you're 14 or you're 40. I mean, it's surprising, but not surprising how people are really still in the dark around how their bodies work. So, you know, I think that if nothing else, like if you're a person that's like, oh, I don't care about birth control or whatever your thoughts are about how birth control affects you, I think it's a really deeper film about body literacy and about body sovereignty and women's movements. And, you know, it's just, I think, very illuminating and empowering on so many levels. And I definitely think it's, you know, for mothers who are trying to make all kinds of reproductive health decisions for their daughters. And I think it's for men to watch. I really think it's like essential viewing on many levels.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you know, there's going to be a lot of people listening to this podcast who probably aren't on the pill and have been off for a long time. Maybe they never took it. Maybe they feel they know a lot about what the side effects are and they've already made that conscious decision for themselves. But I would say one thing you can't beat is the validation that a lot of people say that the film gives them. So we all, however confident you feel about having made that decision, there are going to be times when maybe you've doubted it or times where you felt you've been questioned on it, maybe by your doctor or your partner or your family, that something has come up for you. And watching this film, a lot of people say to us, is just so emotionally important for that validation element, to feel like, okay, I was right. I did the right thing for myself. And I think as women, we're often taught to like doubt our decisions and think, you know, did I make the right decision for myself, for my family, for other people, even for society? We take a lot on our shoulders, and it's great to watch, even if you've already made that decision, and to feel like you're part of something and you're like, you know, on the right side of history, and that, you know, you did the right thing for yourself. And like Abby said, it goes really deep. This, as you know, Iris, this stuff goes really deep. Learning about your body, and it's not just about feeling better, although that's massively important. It's about what we want for our society as a whole. So it's about so much more than just health and wellness. And I think that really comes across in the film.
It definitely does. Thank you so much for that addition, and also for sharing. Where can people find you both, and where can they find the movie?
Well, you can find everything about the movie on our socials, which is at Business of Birth Control. The website is thebusinessofbirthcontrol.com. So everything you need to know about the movie is like on our socials, our website. And then my social is Abby Epstein XOXO. And Holly's is Sweetening the Pill. Right, Holly?
Yeah, and I still have a website, sweeteningthepill.com. You can get my book most places you can buy books, although it's becoming a little harder these days. And I have a couple of courses on my website too. I did like a kind of rambling, long academic style course on the feminist guide to going off the pill. And then another one, which is just my much shorter workshop, which you see showcased a little bit in the documentary, which you can watch in full. And they're on my website too. But yeah, that's just sweeteningthepill.com. Everything's linked out from there.
Amazing. I will add all your information to the show notes as well, so people can find it easily. And I just want to thank you both, and Holly, also thank Ricki for co-creating this documentary with you. And I'm so grateful that you both made the time to come and share your wisdom and your knowledge here on the podcast today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Iris. What a pleasure. Such a pleasure. We're really big fans of your work and your approach, and it's just a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, with your friends, with your family. Post about it on social media, or leave a rating or a review on all the platforms. To catch all the latest news from me, you can follow at the Planting Seeds podcast on Instagram, or at Cycle Seeds on Instagram. Or you can go to my website, www.cycleseeds.com. Thank you again so much, and I'll see you next time.